And I want to go back and kind of reminisce about some old days back there, them Jim Crow days, and kind of I want to throw out a number of names that really impressed me and I learned from back in those days. One was a young man that many of you may remember named Reverend Ezekiel Bell. Reverend Bell came in here about 1959, started Fellowship Presbyterian Church, and one day he was saying to us little students up there at Alabama A&M, he said, I want you to meet down here at Fellowship Presbyterian Church. We got to do something about this Jim Crow, about this white water and colored water and all of these things that are not good. I said, I better go on down there. And when I got down there, he says, I'm going to start a steering committee. I thought he said stirring. I said, yeah, he's going to stir up something. So I want to be a part of it. And so he went ahead and got the steering committee together, and I learned from them. I'm going to throw out some acronyms here now, along with one of the professors up there at Alabama A&M. I took some courses under him. Y'all remember he was an attorney, Randolph Blackwell. And Blackwell was a key person in terms of the strategy. So they put together what is known as the GP, that's the game plan, the AP, the action plan, that PB was a power base, and I added to it, said, now we need some CF. What's CF? Cash flow. I didn't have much cash flow back in them days. And anyway, those guys were very, very impressive to me. They, just want to mention a few of the adults that really stood out in my mind back in those days. And I was fortunate to start with the movement from day one to the end, and had my first taste of food over there at W.T. Grant's downtown. We had to eat at Sister Trunk's barbecue stand down there, and what was the name? That Sweet Shop, and the other one down there, yeah, Sugar Bowl, yeah, owned by Mr. Bartley. But I want you to know that in this whole scenario, Reverend Bell and Mr. Blackwell and all those persons, they connected up with a young lady named Miss Joan Cashin. Miss Cashin was essentially in charge of us, these little knuckleheads students. And so she began to put the program together. And another jailbird we had back in those days was a person that many of you will remember, Reverend L.F. Lacey. We tell a little story about it. Reverend Lacey, as they say, was down there in jail, in L.D. Wall's jail. Very filthy jail down there. Reverend Lacey wanted to get out of jail. And he says he called in old Brother Adams and all of them, probably alive, but it sounds pretty good to me. He says, y'all come down here and get me out of this jail. Chad had a heart attack down here. Yeah. So, y'all remember Brother Lacey, he had a church, that it started right up there on the street, right around from down to the high school. Another person that really stood out in my mind was Reverend Cleveland Piggy. Y'all may remember Brother Piggy. He stood out. I'll tell y'all a little story about him down at Walgreen, and he and Reverend Bell and all of those. And one of the persons who's still around, he should be about 100 years old now, is old Brother R.C. Adams. Oh yeah, y'all remember old Adams? Oh, Adams was down there during them days, and he was marching around. He had an old mule going down the street, talk about says, how do you say it? I'm not registered to vote because I'm a mule. Say, what's your excuse? So Brother Adams really made an impression on me. Now, in terms of those sit-ins, you'd be surprised there, guys out of Freeman Battle Barbershop, Levi Freeman, Willie B. Battle, old Doc Bone, you could depend on them to hit them lunch counters and sit in and so forth and so on. A lot of people don't remember that, but I just want to, many of those guys are no longer on the planet, but they really impressed me. And you could, another person that you all may, many of you may remember, was old brother Charles Ray Sr. He was able to work with that Second Cumberland Presbyterian Church down there, and I think we called the Reverend E.D. White, or whatever his name was. Yeah, I think we killed him down there with all that. But old Charles Ray and Mrs. Cashin would always see that we had a little food, and we can't leave out Reverend H.B. Snodgrass. Now down there at First Baptist Church, we would have our weekly meetings, you know, with the singing and so forth, and I get good times to throw out Harold Dickerson. Harold Dickerson, he would kind of lead the singing, and oh man, we would have a good time down there at First Baptist, and that was where the mass meetings were held, and some notable persons came in there, and one guy came in named Dr. Mordecai Johnson, and that man, he talked for 2 hours, and I was on the edge of my seat for 2 hours listening to this Dr. Mordecai Johnson. Let me go to a few of the youth that really stood out in my mind, who were involved in the movement in those days. One was a person, I believe his name was Dwight Sims, and then there was old William Pearson. William Pearson was really supposed to be the student leader. Old Wig, we called him Wig. Wig just passed away a couple of years ago. Wig Pearson, he also had another partner with him. I think they were out of Birmingham. We were all students at Alabama A&M. There was another one named Eddie Sherrod that really stood out, and I remember I've already mentioned Harold Dixon. While we're on Harold Dixon, old Harold, Miss Cashin told us one morning, said, okay, say, y'all going over there showing his big boy and sit in. That's right. Yeah. So now y'all listen. Say, we weren't short on this jail money to get folk out of jail. So y'all don't, we don't want y'all going over there getting put in jail. So old brother Harold, amen, he goes over there and showing his big boy that Saturday. And they told us, y'all trespassers there. Y'all ends, y'all got to go. Yeah, Harold he stood around in there fussing. They done come in and put the handcuffs on old Harold and carried him to jail. Say, Harold, man, we need to get on out of here. So Miss Cashin told us that we don't supposed to go to jail. So John Brown, they carried old Harold off jail. But it was so interesting. I went over there about a year ago. Used to like to go down there over showing his big boy, you know, that big old breakfast they had over there. I went over there, that thing was locked up tight as Dick Hat-Man. When I think about it, I always think about my friend, old Dr. Harold Dickerson. And so I went back a little while later on, and it was torn down to the ground. Showing his big boy right there at the corner of University, University and Parkway. Okay, yeah. Let me mention our jailbird. Amen. Old Francis Sims. Francis Sims just stayed in jail. Every time we looked around, Frances was down there in jail. She must have known that that was going to be her ticket to go on with Dr. Martin Luther King to Atlanta. And so he picked up Frances, and also Dr. King also carried Randolph Blackwell out of here to Atlanta for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, all great persons. Now, I want to say one thing that I found out later on. Reverend Ezekiel Bell, as many of you know, Sister Connolly was my mentor, teacher, and my preacher. I hung with Reverend Bell for 50-some years, even when he left Huntsville in 1968. They gave him a brand new car and said, okay, Reverend Bell, it's time for you to get on out of here. And he went on back to Memphis, but let me just go back to Reverend Bell, which I found out that when he graduated from Tennessee State, he went on to Chicago Theological Seminary, where he received his degree in cutting-edge ministry. And that's why he was so effective in putting programs together here in Huntsville. He organized one group called the Sisters of Concern. And you look around, and if you wanted to see something done, you had to look at Reverend Bell. Let me move on to my conclusion and tell you why I believe that things were brought to a head here in Huntsville. We had a little newspaper back in those days called the Huntsville Mirror, and I was on the scene down at Walgreens downtown. So they says, we got to do something to kind of bring this thing to a head. Mrs. Joan Cashin, she shows up with old Cheryl, a little old daughter, looked like it was about, to me, maybe a year or so old, not sure. 4 months. 4 months? Okay, and there was another beautiful young lady married to this young man over here named Mrs. Martha Herford. And if I recall, that I'm going to have to go ahead and write this stuff down. You know, my computer works real well. But that was another one looked like to me. She was about 8 or 9 months pregnant. How many months was Mrs. Mrs. Herford pregnant during that time? 7.5. I know I was close. I said 8, yeah. So they had come down there at old Walgreens, and all of them, Reverend Bell, Reverend Lacey, and let me see, best of my memory, Reverend Piggy, man, they put them all in jail. And you talking about a mess. That was a time that really brought attention. We had an old mayor back then named old Spec Cersei. And man, them old big boys out there, old Cummings, and all of them got on the case. And within a short time, after that arrest, things were brought to a head, and we were able to go and eat some of them hamburgers. Many of us went down and didn't even have enough money to pay for them. But anyway, it was an interesting journey, and today what I have been trying to say, I'm 10 now, and what I learned back in those days, the question is, what are we doing with what we gained back then, and where do we go from here? We have problems today that is as monumental and worse than we had back then. So about 4 months ago, I told some folks, I said, I'm gonna have a celebration. Steele, what you gonna celebrate? I said, well, didn't know I was gonna go down there and fall off the radar screen and not know I was in the world for about 8 to 12 hours, I say I'm going to celebrate the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So we've started a national program dealing with teaching our dimes and dollars and cents. It started right here in the early 60s. We are working on a program now. It's trying to do something about this black on black crime. And about 25 years ago, we were going a paper came out, 101 ways to deal with this racial prejudice and hatred. So I've been moving for about 3 years, so I'm finding all these papers that we've had for all these years. So now we're trying to implement all of those programs, this national program. We're looking at Chicago as being the murder capital of the world, and we're also trying to start over at the Madison County Courthouse and dealing with this 101 ways of dealing with racial prejudice. This paper was put out by Barnes and Noble, and I think my daddy used to tell me, son, says put a little shortening in your speech, so I think I've covered just about everything that I want to cover. And one of these days, I'm going to go ahead and write it all down because I think that people like Earlene Burl and Bertha Burroughs and all of those persons who hit them lunch counters so and were so dependable in out there sitting in, we need to know. And that's a part of our rich history. I had a brother named old George Steele. He was a barber, and he would go out there and sit in and get in jail and not show up for his trial date. And who was that doctor? That white doctor. He was talking about putting him in jail, or maybe Dr.
Dr. Howie?
Yeah, Dr. Howie, right. They were over there talking about putting him, Dr. Herford, in jail because my brother didn't show up for jail time, old George. Yeah, but that was old George. But I'm going to stop at this point. I have certainly enjoyed reminiscing about the good old Jim Crow days back then. Thank you so much for inviting me.